Phil Goff thinks the government needs to ensure there's enough land supply in Christchurch to meet with demand for new properties to ensure there's no price spike for people buying those new properties. Do you think the government's doing enough there to ensure that there's enough properties available?
Yeah, I do, and we've raised that issue. When we were in Christchurch last weekend for the Cabinet, we had quite a number of discussions on that particular point. The Council has assured us there is a range of sections coming available, and we have the capacity under CERA to fast-track that if we need to.
Because red zone homeowners are worried that the payout won't be enough to pay for property prices, properties that are on the market. Do you think that property prices will be around the level of their payouts?
It's very difficult for me to determine that because it depends on where they are, what they own, what they want to buy. There's a range of different circumstances. One thing I do know is that Christchurch is blessed as a city that it has a lot of available land. So that is the one difference, say, between Christchurch and, say, Wellington or Auckland. So yes, we need to speed that process up potentially. If we do, we can step in and we have the legislation to do it. But the assurances we've had from Christchurch is that that flow is happening quite rapidly. Now, it's a combination of making sure we work with those developers and get that right.
I think you were asked this last week, but the fear that a number of people have in Christchurch is that if our last to get into the market, prices will have pushed up. I mean, is there anything the government can look at doing to help them out that if they end up paying higher prices for land than those that you've got it first?
Yeah, so possibly anything it might be the other way around. I mean, the flow of land and the available land, which is quite sizable, and we raised that issue with Ngaitahu, who's a major developer. The government itself, actually, by virtue of South Canterbury Finances, inherited a lot of land. There's quite a number of subdivisions that are actually available there. If anything, the flow might be so great later on that prices actually more reflect that. But there's two things that are happening. I mean, anyone in the red zone knows that they have a absolute categoric assurance from the government that they'll buy their land at rateable value, and the second, or buy their property at rateable value. And the second thing is the banks have indicated that they'll lend against that immediately. It's a difficult issue. I mean, obviously, some of them are trying to deal with the risks there and what's happening in terms of their seismic activity and actually their reinsurers. But I think things are progressing reasonably well with the reinsurers in terms of the visit Jerry Brownlee's having. It's patchy, actually, when it comes to reinsurance. It's not completely clear in terms of people getting insurance. Some people can get insurance on their property. They buy another property. Other people are experiencing some difficulties. One company's trying to cash out a few people, even at above rates, to actually get them to cash out. So there's a bit of a mixture. By 150, well, that would depend on what their circumstances are, right? So again, as I understand it, there's a range of different reasons there. One is potentially, and this is the whole reason why the government's in the position it is, the government has effectively done something that no other government around the world's done, and that is agreed to buy every single property in the red zone at rateable value. Rateable value is arguably, in some cases, 5% above where market value is today, and if it was buying those properties, say, even if they'd been fixed up but in land that has been subject to such enormous seismic activity, could be valued a lot lower. So we're actually buying at quite a reasonable price. The problem, I suspect, is, though I haven't spoken to each of the individual owners, is that the insurance companies are saying we'll pay you out on built property damage, and that is not as significant as a write-off of the land, and so they're not getting replacement value. And again, so I can understand their frustration, but actually that frustration could have been shared by up to 6,000 property owners, and the government is actually paying them all out in what we're trying to make the fairest deal we can do for both the taxpayers who are paying for it and those who are receiving it.
Even in the orange zone, we're expecting an announcement or something around about this time. Can you progress on that, and when might that?
I don't have the latest update on that. I mean, what I do know is Tonkin and Taylor are moving as rapidly as they can, and what's critically important is that people get the right information, the right advice. If we're ultimately moving either someone back to green or into red, we've actually got to be absolutely sure we're right. So I know Tonkin and Taylor are going as fast as they can.
You mentioned banks being prepared to lend. Have you got any further on what happens to freehold people who can't afford to borrow again?
Yeah, so again, there's a range of different circumstances, and that would be true of any New Zealander looking to change their property. I mean, of course, there are some people, for instance, that would be in the red zone that might want to buy out their neighbours down the road, for instance, who are effectively deemed to be in the green zone but over the road and therefore not in the red zone. So there's all sorts of options of how people might change. We had some general discussions with the council last week about what might happen to a specific group of older New Zealanders who might find it very difficult to fund themselves if there's an increase in price, and how that might work. And again, there's a range of potential solutions being worked through there.
So how might that work?
Well, I mean, it depends on the release of land and a variety of different things.
Would the government set up some kind of agencies where people can go to get help with, not necessarily get insurance, but help with getting insurance and help with getting finance? So at least you get a handle of how big the problem is.
Well, our preference is to allow the private sector to work, and that's because most people have their own insurance, their own banking obligations and the likes and relationships. So our preference is for them to work through their private sector relationships. If there is a major sticking point, then of course the council and government can look at that issue, but our preference is to let the natural process take care of itself. And actually over time it will. So even in recent weeks, some insurance issues are freeing up. Not all of them, but some are.
Some of the workers could argue this has been a market failure and it's time for the government to stand in.
Some people will say that, and as I say, some of that may be cured over time. Some of it the government continues to get advice on. Others are freeing up. It depends.
How long is the government prepared to wait while the market corrects?
Well, the issue partly is around the capacity for people to take and assess risk while there continues to be seismic activity. And ultimately, if the government stepped in and became an insurer, it too would have to look at all of those issues.